The CEO held out a check for $5 million, a real one, made out signed the number spelled across it in ink, and the whole hangar held its breath waiting for the mechanic to take it. He'd earned it. He'd just done the impossible. 20 experts, several weeks a jet that would not run, and this man in a work shirt had walked in and fixed it in minutes in front of everyone, exactly as the bet had promised. $5 million to anyone who can fix it. He'd fixed it. The money was his. And Sawyer Boyd looked at that check, and he looked at the jet, and he looked at the woman holding it out. Vivian Thorne, white suit, a smile already rehearsing the press release, and he said two words that made her face fall in a way that $5 million should never make anyone's face fall. Keep the money. He picked up his bag, turned around, and walked toward the hangar doors. Now stop, because your first instinct is the wrong one, and I want to correct it right now. Your first instinct is that this is a proud man making a noble gesture, a humble guy who doesn't need money, refusing a reward to prove he's above it. I don't do it for the money, that kind of thing. It is not that, not even close. Sawyer Boyd needed that money. He was a single father with a daughter and a mortgage and the ordinary money worries every working person has. $5 million would have changed his life and his little girl's life completely, and he knew it standing right there, and he still said, keep it. Not because he was too proud to take it, but because he had figured out in the few minutes it took him to fix that jet exactly what that $5 million was actually for. It wasn't a reward. It was never a reward. It was a receipt. And if he signed it, if he cashed it, he would be putting his name on the biggest lie in that hangar. He'd understood that a fraction of a second before his hand would have closed around it. Look at Vivian Thorne's face in that moment. That's not the face of a woman annoyed that someone refused her generosity. That's the face of a woman watching her one reliable tool fail her for the first time in her life because a man just did the single thing she had no answer for. He refused to be paid. Now here are the questions, and every answer opens a worse one. Why would a man who needs the money walk away from $5 million? If the fix was so easy he did it in minutes, why did 20 experts fail for weeks? And what was that bet, that whole public $5 million spectacle to fix the unfixable jet actually for? If you want the answer, subscribe and stay with me because it turns the whole thing inside out. Let's rewind. Sawyer Boyd, 49, hadn't even come there for the bet. That's worth getting straight because this isn't a story about a man chasing $5 million. He was an aviation maintenance guy, a good one, a lifer, the kind who'd spent 30 years around aircraft and knew them in his hands. He'd heard about the spectacle the way everyone in that world had heard about it. A wealthy woman with a grounded private jet had made a very public show of offering $5 million to anyone who could fix a fault her own experts had been defeated by for weeks. The whole industry was talking about it, and most of the talk was admiring. What a fault. What a mystery 20 specialists couldn't crack, it imagine. A lot of hopeful mechanics had shown up to try their luck. Sawyer came for a different reason. He came because something about the story bothered him, and he couldn't put his finger on it, and he wanted to see the thing with his own eyes. Because here's a thing Sawyer Boyd knew from 30 years that most people don't. Aircraft faults are almost never mysteries. They can be hard, genuinely hard to find, hard to reach, tedious, expensive, but mysterious in the way this one was being described, a fault so exotic and baffling that 20 specialists over several weeks couldn't even understand it, let alone fix it. That's not how it works. Airplanes are documented, systematic, knowable things. A fault that defeats 20 experts for weeks isn't usually a hard fault. It's usually a fault that's been hidden. And that distinction, hard versus hidden, was the thing itching at the back of his mind as he drove to that hangar. Because a fault can be trivially easy and still defeat 20 experts if someone has disguised it, if someone has made a simple thing look like a complicated thing on purpose, so that everyone chasing it goes looking in the wrong place at the wrong level for the wrong kind of problem. He didn't know that's what it was. He just wanted to look. He brought his daughter because it was his day with her. Etta, 11, sharp, watchful, a kid who asked good questions and had recently been having a hard week for reasons we'll come to. She sat on a toolbox with a book while her dad went to look at the famous impossible jet, and she watched the whole thing unfold, and she learned something that week she'll carry her whole life. Sawyer walked up to that jet and looked at the fault the way 30 years had taught him to look, and within about 4 minutes, two things happened in his head at once. The first was, oh, that's not hard, that's easy, I can fix that. and the second half a second later was the one that changed everything. Wait, why has this been made to look hard? Let me explain what he saw, and I'll keep it impressionistic because the point isn't the mechanics, it's the shape. The 20 experts had been chasing an exotic fault. They'd been told, and the evidence in front of them suggested that this was some rare, complex, deep systemic failure, the kind of thing that requires you to tear into the most sophisticated parts of the aircraft run. Elaborate diagnostics theorize about subtle interactions between advanced systems. So that's what they did for weeks. They went deep because everything told them the problem was deep. And the problem was not deep. It was shallow and simple and ordinary, and it had been dressed up to look deep. Someone had introduced on top of the simple real fault a layer of misdirection symptoms that pointed the wrong way, a presentation that screamed exotic systemic failure when the actual cause was a basic thing a first-year apprentice could have addressed if they'd been looking at the right level. The 20 experts failed because they were experts. That's the cruel part. Their expertise told them a problem this stubborn must be sophisticated, so they looked in sophisticated places, and the simple truth was sitting underneath the whole time wearing a costume. Sawyer Boyd found it in minutes precisely because he wasn't dazzled. He didn't assume a hard-looking problem was a hard problem. He'd learned over 30 years to distrust exactly that assumption, to ask, first, is this actually complicated or has someone made it look complicated? And the moment he asked that question, the costume fell off, and the simple thing underneath was obvious. He fixed it quietly, quickly, without drama. The jet ran. But here's the thing, and this is the exact instant the whole story turned for him. Fixing it told him it had been disguised, and disguised told him something far more disturbing than broken. Because a fault doesn't disguise itself. Airplanes don't develop simple problems and then spontaneously dress them up to look complicated. That takes a person. Someone had taken a simple, ordinary failure and deliberately made it present as an exotic mystery, and the second, Sawyer Boyd, understood that he understood the whole thing. The bet, the spectacle, the $5 million, all of it standing there with grease on his hands and a check about to be pressed into them. Somebody hadn't just broken this jet. Somebody had built a story around it, and the $5 million was the last page of the story. Here's what was really going on, and it's the spine of the whole thing. The jet's simple fault came from a cut corner somewhere in Vivian Thorne's operation to save time or money or both. A proper step had been skipped, a shortcut taken, a thing done cheap that should have been done right. Ordinary corporate corner cutting, the most common disease there is. And the corner that got cut wasn't unique to this one jet. That's the part that mattered. The shortcut was systemic, a way of doing things that ran across Vivian Thorne's whole operation, her whole fleet, her whole approach. This particular jet was simply the first one to start showing symptoms. It was the canary. And if anyone looked at why this jet had failed and traced it honestly back to its cause, they wouldn't find a freak one-off. They'd find a practice, a pattern, a cut corner, repeated across everything she owned, which would be a scandal. And worse than a scandal, because a systemic cut corner in aircraft is the kind of thing that eventually stops being about money and starts being about people who don't come home. So Vivian Thorne had a choice when this jet first failed, and her people quietly told her what it really was. She could face it, trace the cut corner, admit the practice, fix it across the fleet, take the hit, expensive, humiliating, correct. Or she could bury it, and she was a woman who had never in her life chosen the first option because she had a tool that had always worked. So here's what she did, and it's genuinely clever in a horrible way. She took a simple failure caused by a cut corner, a failure that examined honestly would expose a systemic problem, and she had it disguised to look like an exotic, freakish, one-in-a-million technical mystery. And then she went public with it, loudly. She staged the whole spectacle, the impossible jet, the 20 defeated experts, the $5 million bet. Why go public with something you're trying to hide? That's the genius of it, because the spectacle reframes the failure. It takes something that quietly investigated looks like her company cuts dangerous corners and turns it publicly into her jet, suffered a fault so exotic and rare that the finest experts in the country were baffled by it. One story is a scandal, the other is bad luck plus a fascinating engineering puzzle. Same jet, same failure, completely different meaning, and the spectacle chooses the meaning. And the $5 million bet is the masterstroke, because when somebody finally solves the impossible fault and collects the money, the story completes itself. Now it's official. This was a genuinely impossible problem. Look, it took a $5 million genius to crack it. Nothing systemic here, nothing was cut. It was just an extraordinarily hard, rare freak fault now brilliantly solved. Case closed. The winner of the bet isn't a mechanic being rewarded. The winner of the bet is the final witness to her cover story, the person whose payday proves the fault was impossibly hard rather than deliberately hidden. Cash the check and you've certified her version of events with your own name. You've become the guy who confirms forever that this was an exotic one-off and not the first symptom of a systemic rot. That's what the $5 million was for. It was never a reward for fixing a jet. It was a payment for agreeing with her about how the jet broke. And Sawyer Boyd figured that out with the check 6 inches from his hand. Keep the money. Now, Vivian Thorne, because you need to understand why buying her way out was so automatic that she built a $5 million spectacle around it without blinking. Vivian Thorne had never in her entire life actually faced a problem. She had always paid it away. That was her one tool, and it was a magnificent tool, and it had never once failed her. Every problem she had ever encountered from the time she was young enough to have money, she had solved the same way. She wrote a check. A business dispute, settle it. A scandal, pay for silence. A mistake, buy your way past the consequences. A person who knew too much, put them on a payroll or a settlement. A relationship going wrong, throw money at it. For Vivian Thorne, money wasn't just money. It was a universal solvent. It was how you make a problem stop being true. And when you've spent an entire life discovering that every single problem dissolves in enough money, something happens to you that's almost impossible to reverse. You forget that any other method exists. She genuinely could not conceive of facing the cut-corner problem, tracing it, admitting it, fixing it honestly, because that's not a move in her vocabulary. It would be like asking a fish to climb a tree. Her only move, the only move she'd ever needed, was to make it go away with money. So of course she staged a $5 million spectacle to bury a scandal. To her, that wasn't even a scheme. That was just how you handle things. You pay, the problem disappears, it always has. And that's why a man refusing the money didn't just annoy her, it terrified her. Because Sawyer Boyd saying keep the money had just done the one single thing she had no response to. Her entire life, her entire power, her entire sense of how the world works, rested on the certainty that everyone can be paid, that there is always a number, that the check always closes the matter. And a man had just looked at her biggest number, $5 million, and said no, and walked toward the door. And Vivian Thorne stood there holding a useless check with the sudden vertiginous horror of a person discovering that her one tool doesn't work on the one man who matters. She had no idea what to do. There was nothing to do. She couldn't pay him to take the payment. Her whole toolbox contained exactly one tool, and he was immune to it. And here's the mirror, the thing that makes her more than a villain. She had bought every single person in her life, her staff, her advisors, her friends, even her family. All of them in one way or another, salaried, gifted, funded, settled with, provided for. And Vivian Thorne had made the loneliest mistake a rich person can make. She had confused paying for people with being loved by them. She was surrounded constantly by people who did what she wanted, and every one of them did it because she paid them to, and some deep part of her knew it. And it was why she was so completely, echoingly alone in the middle of all that wealth. She'd never once been chosen by anyone who wasn't being compensated for choosing her. She didn't know what it felt like. She'd bought it all, and buying it had hollowed it all out, and she'd never understood the connection. A man refusing her money was the first genuinely free act anyone had performed in front of her in years, and it broke something open in her. It would take the rest of the story for her to understand what. Here's what makes Sawyer Boyd's keep the money so much smarter than it looks. He could have taken the $5 million and then gone to the press, exposed her, blown the whole thing up publicly. The jet fault was faked. The CEO is covering up systemic corner cutting. Here's the proof. That's the loud, dramatic movie version. He didn't do that, and his reasoning is the best thing in the story. Because think about what happens if he takes the money and talks. Instantly, he's a man who accepted $5 million and then turned around and attacked the person who paid him. That's a guy with an axe to grind. That's a disgruntled winner. His credibility is compromised the moment the check clears. He took the money and then made up a story, probably wanted more. Cashing the check would have destroyed the very testimony he wanted to give. It would have made him bribable and therefore doubtable. And it works the other way too. If he takes the money and stays quiet, which is what she's paying for, then he's complicit, and the cover-up is complete, and the systemic problem stays buried until it surfaces somewhere with people aboard. So both versions of taking the money are traps. Take it and talk, you're a liar with an axe to grind. Take it and stay silent, you're an accomplice. The check is designed so that touching it compromises you no matter what you do next. There was exactly one move that kept him clean and kept the truth alive. Refuse it, in public, in front of everyone. Because a man refusing $5 million is the single most attention-grabbing thing that can happen in a room. There were 20 experts and executives and staff, and it was a public spectacle, so word would travel. And every one of them was left with one screaming question. Why? Why would a man who clearly fixed it, who clearly earned it, who clearly could use it, refuse $5 million? You cannot pay that question to go away. It's the one question Vivian Thorne's money can't reach, because the refusal itself is the thing generating it. Every person who heard that a mechanic fixed the impossible jet and then turned down the $5 million immediately understood that something was wrong with the story, because nobody turns down that kind of money for a fix unless there's something about the fix or the money that they can't put their name to. His refusal was a flare. It didn't accuse her of anything. He never said a public word against her, but it made the whole spectacle smell wrong loudly to everyone in a way no accusation could have. He didn't expose the cover-up. He just refused to complete it and left a $5 million hole in the middle of her story where the final witness was supposed to be and let everyone stare at the hole. Then he did the quiet part, the part that actually protected people. I didn't go to the cameras. He went like the honest men in these stories always go to the people with skin in the game. The pilots who flew her fleet, the maintenance crews who worked on the other aircraft, the people who would be in the air or would send others into the air if the systemic cut corner stayed buried. He found them off the record and told them plainly what he'd found. Not your boss is evil. But here's a real thing. Here's what was actually wrong with that jet. Here's why it wasn't a freak, and here's what you should go check on every other aircraft in this fleet before somebody gets hurt. He gave them the finding the true one, the undisguised one, and he gave it to the exact people who could act on it and who had every reason to. And that's what actually killed the cover-up, not a headline. The pilots and the crews, once they knew what to look for, could not unknow it, and they were not going to fly or let anyone else fly on a systemic problem that had been papered over with a spectacle. The truth spread through the people who maintained and flew those aircraft quietly and unstoppably, and the cut corner got found and fixed across the fleet because the people whose lives depended on it made sure it did. Nobody got a headline. Nobody got destroyed on the news. The systemic problem simply got fixed quietly by the people it endangered because one man refused to be the final signature on the lie that it didn't exist. There's an 11-year-old in this story, and she'd been having a hard week, and it's why the whole thing landed the way it did. Sawyer Boyd had a problem at school that week, and it was in miniature, the exact same problem her father was facing in that hangar. Which is the kind of coincidence that isn't really a coincidence, because these problems are everywhere, at every scale, all the time. Here's what happened. A girl in her class, a wealthy girl whose family had money, had done something broken, a rule gotten another kid blamed for it. Something unfair, and Etta had seen it. And the girl, knowing Etta had seen, had offered her something, a nice thing, a gift, an invitation to a party everyone wanted to go to if Etta just didn't say anything. Not framed as a bribe, framed as friendship. We're friends now, right? You wouldn't get me in trouble. Here, come to my party. And Etta had been sitting with it for days because it was a genuinely hard thing for an 11-year-old. The gift was real. The party was real. Saying nothing was easy, and the girl hadn't even done anything that terrible. And it wasn't really Etta's business, and everybody said just let it go, and the party was this weekend. She was turning it over on that toolbox in the hangar when she watched her father refuse $5 million, and afterward, in the truck, she asked him about it. And Sawyer Boyd, who had just lived the adult version of exactly her problem, told her the truth and connected the two things for her in a way she never forgot. Etta, that money I said no to, he said, pulling out of the lot. Do you know what it was really for? Fixing the plane. That's what it looked like, But no. He thought about how to say it. That woman had a problem, a real one, a serious one, something her company did wrong that could hurt people. And instead of fixing the wrong thing, she wanted to pay everyone to agree that it wasn't there. That's what the $5 million was. It wasn't payment for fixing a plane. It was payment for agreeing with her lie about how the plane broke. Etta went very still because she'd heard the word agree and something had clicked. And here's the thing, kiddo, the thing I need you to understand. He glanced at her. I could have used that money. You know I could have. It would have changed our whole life. But if I take it then for the rest of my life, I'm a man who is paid to say a true thing was false. And you can't undo that. Once you've sold that, once you've taken money to agree with a lie, you don't get it back. That's the one thing you own that's actually yours, Etta. Not your stuff, not your money. The list of things you're willing to say are true. That's the one thing nobody can take from you. They can only buy it, and only if you let them. And Etta Boyd said very quietly, Dad, I have to tell you about Madison. And she told him the broken rule, the kid who got blamed, the gift, the party, that we're friends now, right? And Sawyer Boyd said, so you got offered your $5 million too. It's not $5 million, it's a party. Etta, it's the exact same thing. I promise you it is. It's a gift in exchange for agreeing that a true thing didn't happen. The number's different. The deal is identical. He smiled at her. So you've got the same choice I had. You can have the party, or you can have the thing where you don't sell what you're willing to call true. You can't have both. Nobody ever gets both. That's what makes it a real choice. But it's just a party, Dad. And Madison didn't even do anything that bad. And everyone says just let it go. I know, kiddo. Mine was just a jet and $5 million, and everyone in that hangar thought I was crazy. He shrugged. The small ones and the big ones feel exactly the same from the inside. That's the trap. It always feels like this one's not a big deal. It's just a party. It's just a check. Just this once. And every single person who ever sold themselves out one just this once at a time. Etta was quiet the rest of the drive. On Monday, she told the teacher what she'd seen. She didn't go to the party. Madison was furious, and it cost Etta a friend and a weekend. And it was genuinely hard, and she did it anyway because she'd watched her father turn down $5 million 3 days earlier, and she'd understood at 11. The thing most people never understand, that there is a price for everything you own except one thing, and the one thing without a price is only priceless, as long as you never once name the number. Vivian Thorne kept the check, literally. She never tore it up, and she never cashed it. Obviously, she couldn't. The actual physical check made out to a man who wouldn't take it sat in a drawer in her office, and it did something to her that all her successful checks never had. It reminded her every time she saw it that her one tool had a limit. For the first time in her life, Vivian Thorne had met a problem she couldn't pay away, and the problem wasn't the jet, and it wasn't even Sawyer Boyd. The problem was the truth, which turns out to be the one thing money genuinely cannot purchase or silence. Because the moment you pay someone to agree with a lie, the truth simply relocates to the next person who won't take your money, and there is always a next person, and one of them is always a Sawyer Boyd. She never faced criminal consequences. She hadn't, in the strict sense, done anything a court could easily name. But the cover-up failed. The systemic problem got fixed by the people it endangered, no thanks to her. And she was left with the truth. She'd spent her whole life avoiding sitting in a drawer in the form of an uncashed check. She wrote to Sawyer Boyd once. It was short. You're the first person in 30 years who wouldn't take my money. I've thought about why every day since. I think it's because you had something to protect that I never learned I was allowed to have. I don't know how to get it now, but I wanted you to know I finally understand what you refused, and that it wasn't the money. He didn't write back because there was nothing to say that the refusal hadn't already said. But he kept the note. Etta found it years later because he thought it was the most honest thing that woman had ever produced, and it had cost her nothing, and it wasn't payment for anything, which was, he figured, exactly the point. Here's what I want you to take with you. Some money isn't payment. It's the purchase of your agreement. Most money you'll ever be offered is clean. It's payment for work, for time, for value, and you should take it and feel good about it. But every so often money shows up that isn't really paying you for what it claims to be paying you for. It's paying you to agree with something, to stay quiet about something, to put your name on a version of events, to call a true thing false or a false thing true. And that money always arrives disguised as a reward, because if it announced itself honestly, you'd never take it. The way you tell the difference is to ask what you're actually being paid for. Sawyer Boyd asked, and the answer wasn't for fixing a jet. It was for agreeing that the jet broke by accident. And once you can see that the check is really a receipt for your silence or your signature or your agreement, you can't unsee it, and you understand that taking it costs you something. No amount of money can buy back. Because here's the thing you actually own. The only thing, the thing this whole story is about, the list of things you're willing to say are true. That's it. That's the one possession that's genuinely unpurchasably yours. Not your money, not your stuff, not your reputation. Those can all be taken or bought or lost. But what you're willing to call true, that can only be sold and only by you, and only if you agree to the price. Nobody can take it from you. They can only offer you a number for it. And the entire game, your whole life, is whether you ever name a number you'll accept. And the trap, the thing that gets almost everyone, is that it never arrives as $5 million. It arrives as a party invitation when you're 11, as a small favor, as a just this once. As a, you wouldn't want to make a thing of it, would you? It arrives small and reasonable and easy, and it always feels like this particular one doesn't count. And everyone who ever sold themselves exactly that way, one reasonable little just this once at a time. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and I want you to actually go looking for the answer, because I promise there's one. What if you've been offered money? Comfort, an easy life, a party, a peaceful weekend in exchange for quietly agreeing with a version of things you know isn't true. It's there. It's almost always there. Some small, ongoing arrangement where you've agreed to call something true that isn't, or false that isn't, because disagreeing would cost you something and going along is easy, and it's just this once. Just this job, just this family thing, just this friendship, and I'm not going to tell you it's easy to refuse. Sawyer Boyd walked away from $5 million, and Etta Boyd walked away from a party, and both of those hurt. But there's a reason refusing to be paid can be the loudest way in the world to tell the truth. It's because everyone watching is left with the one question money can't answer. Why would they say no? Be the person who makes them ask it. If this one got under your skin, subscribe and tell me in the comments about a check you refused or one you wish you had. Keep the money.